doctorate in linguistic anthropology from the University of Virginia. What's the relationship between your scholarly work and your poetry?
Well, I came into the doctoral program with the idea of revitalizing a language that's no longer spoken. So that's the relationship there. But I've always been really interested in language, and a lot of the poetry that I write features little snips of native language because I think it's important to focus on how those languages sound, but more importantly, the ideas that they embody. I'm really interested more in the meaning of language than in the grammar construction.
Mm. What does it mean to revitalize a language?
To bring it back, to make it live again, really. This is a language, it's a Siouan language that was spoken by some people up until the 1950s and is no longer spoken at all. But it was documented by a linguist in Canada who worked with a Tutelo speaker who called himself Old Mosquito. That was his native name. And his name was Nikonha, and Nikonha gave him a lot of information so that he was able to document the grammatical rules as well as a lot of the words. So we could reconstruct it to a point without outside help, and then we'll have to draw on other languages and kind of reinvent the way that some of the words would sound.
And is the hope that people will start speaking in that language again on a day-to-day basis, or what's the hope in the revitalization process?
That's what my dissertation explores, is what do people want to do with it and why does it matter? And so many of our people feel like, in particular in the religious context, it would be important to speak the language when we pray, invoking the spirits of our ancestors, and also to just pray within the Creator, the whole sphere of geography that we call our home place. It's important to use those words because the idea is that the language belongs to that place. So that's the more important reason for bringing it back to a point. It's very difficult to think about a whole community of people becoming fluent in the language suddenly. There's such a commitment involved in doing that.
In your first book, Markings on the Earth, came out in 2009. Is that correct?
No, 2000.
2000. And so between Markings on the Earth and Weaving the Boundaries, you did this work. And did you find that studying this other language shaped how you approached writing the poetry and Weaving the Boundaries?
Yes, I did. I think that getting into the idea of an ancestral language changed how I think, because I had to really examine what are the values and belief systems that really inform the native language. It's very difficult to translate a lot of native concepts into English, because English is noun-based and very abstract, and we talk about what we're thinking. And many native languages are verb-based, so it's about what you're doing or did or are going to do. It's practical. We don't sit around and talk about concepts. So it's more being in the moment than referring to, you refer to the past and to the future, but there are different ways for constructing time, thinking of things in a more cyclical manner. And it really changed how I think about the world and my place in it.
I wanted to go back to using the snippets of native language, particularly in the naming, but throughout your book, phonetically, native language is very different from English. And so as a reader, I admit when I encounter them, I don't know how they sound. I don't know how to read them aloud. Sometimes it's translated in the notes. Sometimes it's not. How do you hope the reader encounters those snippets?
As something that is distinctly different, sometimes without knowing how to pronounce them. There are a few poems that I wouldn't want to read in public because I'm not sure I can do it correctly. By the same token, there's one poem that has lines in Latin, and I don't speak Latin. It was very funny because I sent that one off and it was accepted for publication, And the lines are from Catholic Mass, and I'm not Catholic either. But there was one line that had the word laudandum, you know, to praise, to laud. And I wrote laudanum, which is a drug. Whoops.
Whoops.
So that's where the research comes in, and the
Yeah.
corroboration of people who know a lot more than I do. So there are funny moments like that. And there's a line in the naming that's in Athabascan, and I have no clue. So I lucked out in that my friend speaks that language, and I didn't even know that she was a fluent speaker. But I sent the line I had to her, and she wrote back and she said, "This doesn't make any sense." So she gave me the right words.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, and so an English-speaking reader will encounter these profoundly different kind of snippets of language. What does that contribute to the poem?
I think it shows that there are different ways of conceptualizing the world, and in the case of the naming, that there are so many languages that are threatened with loss. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping people come away with, because that's what the poem is about.
So your book, Weaving the Boundary, comes out in March
It does.
2016.
It does. Yeah.
What's next? Are you working on anything new, or?
I don't know. I have another book in mind, but I haven't really started. I keep getting ideas for poems, but they're longer poems, and they're kind of daunting. I'm hoping the next book will be political, but also grounded in the natural world with an environmental consciousness and, of course, a human consciousness. Um, but I don't feel a huge rush at this point to get into that project. I feel really good about wrapping this one up and sending it out. And poems have their own lives when they leave us as writers. And it's always interesting to me. Someone will write out of the blue and say, "I've had this poem on the wall of my dining room for 5 years because it had such meaning to me." And I'm like, "Really? I can't stand that poem." You know, but to see that they have an effect.
Yeah.
I wrote a poem about cancer, and my doctor carried it in his lab coat until it fell apart because he said it reminded him of what he does and why. And that's so great to be able to do that with words.